Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is the latest in a line of over 50 years of Spidey cartoons. We're going to go through every single one and review the best action figures produced from all the different eras of the Webhead's animated history. Hey y'all, and welcome back to Carbon Scoring, the best place for comics history and action figures. I've watched the first 2 episodes of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, and I loved it. It feels like the perfect combination of new and old. We're going to talk more about it in a bit, but it combines the best parts of the cartoons you're about to see and creates something new and fresh while honoring the characters and creators that have made Spider-Man the greatest superhero of all time. But to fully understand, you've got to go back to the beginning. Spidey's animated adventures started with one of the most beloved superhero cartoons of all time, the 1967 Spider-Man show, which aired from September of 67 to June of 1970. I used to get up super early on Saturday mornings to watch reruns on our staticky VHF channels. And while these days the show is most fondly remembered for the super catchy theme song and numerous memes it has spawned, for me, I remember it as a faithful adaptation of the earliest Spidey comics, complete with Steve Ditko art swiped directly from the books. And I'm not wrong. Despite the significant budgetary constraints, the first season of the show was overall pretty faithful to the comics, including a cavalcade of the web spinner's most classic villains. But with seasons 2 and 3, things got pretty weird. Ralph Bakshi, best known for directing the first X-rated animated film Fritz the Cat, which was based off the comic strip by R. Crumb, was brought in to produce the second and third seasons. While Bakshi brought a darker, more cinematic tone, the budgetary restraints were crippling, with several season 3 episodes using recycled footage from another Bakshi production called Rocket Robin Hood. But despite these limitations, the initial Spider-Man cartoon remains a beloved pop culture icon. Now, unfortunately, there were not any toys produced of the 1967 Spider-Man cartoon, but all the way back in 1967, if you can read your Roman numerals, Mark's Toys did produce a series of plastic statues, things that you could pick up at dime stores of various Marvel heroes. And this is the Spider-Man. They came molded in various different colors of plastic, and it has very Ditko stylings, as you can see from the spider on the back and these smaller eyes. Now, oddly enough, these eyes actually have eyeballs sculpted into them, which is quite an unusual look. And I'm not exactly sure why Spidey is in like a I give up position, but it does allow for his web wings to show through. So it's actually kind of a really cool, piece of nostalgia, these 1960s Marx figures. And I actually took an entire series of these and painted them and did an entire video where I went through and painted each one of those. So I'm going to put a link to that in the description if you want to check it out. But the very first true Spider-Man action figure did appear in 1967. Ideal's Captain Action line copied the popular 12-inch G.I. Joe figures of the day, but instead of military outfits, you could get costumes of various superheroes, including the very first Spider-Man figure. While this thing is dated, you can see the level of detail that went into these sewn cloth costumes. This figure is a true grail piece for any Spider-Man collector. Okay, I'm going to cheat and show one more. This is my original 1984 Mattel Marvel Superhero Secret Wars Spider-Man. And of course, he was not made or designed on the 1967 cartoon. But because I played with this guy so much as a kid, I wore off the web pattern on his chest and around his shoulders. So he kind of looks like the artwork for the cartoon because it only had the web pattern up on the head and kind of on the arms. So sorta it represents that 67 look. The late 1960s must have seemed like the beginning of the Marvel Age of Animation, with the Marvel Superheroes Anthology, the Fantastic Four, and Spidey all being on the air. But this was short-lived, as all were finished by mid-1970, ceding the airways and kids' attention to the Super Friends. Premiering in 1973, Super Friends and its numerous sequels dominated the 1970s, making Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman household names. Spidey at least stayed in the public consciousness through his appearances on The Electric Company and his made for TV movies, which you better believe we're going to cover when this figure comes out. But for kids like me, DC dominated our TV sets. Thankfully, that changed in 1981 with the premiere of not one, but two all new Spider Man animated cartoons. The first of these, simply titled Spider Man, ran for one season of 26 episodes from 1981 to 1982. This show was never broadcast in the town I grew up in, so I don't have any childhood memories of it. But I did go back and watch a ton of episodes on Disney Plus. It actually serves as a pretty decent follow up to the first season of the 67 cartoon, in that it's a fairly faithful update of the Villain of the Week stories, with art reminiscent of John Romita Sr.'s style guide drawings. Much like its predecessor, it would reuse animation action sequences and was clearly directed at a younger audience. Far more successful was Spider Man and His Amazing Friends. Intended to go head to head with Super Friends, Spidey was set to team up with Iceman and the Human Torch, but many of the same legal issues that led to this in the FF cartoon kept Johnny out of this one as well. He was replaced by an all new character, Firestar, who has gone on to become a comics fixture. The show opened kids' eyes to the larger Marvel universe, including the first animated appearance of the X-Men, and it's actually aged fairly well. In fact, it is loved enough to warrant a dedicated 3-pack of Marvel Legends action figures. These figures are so much fun. Firestar, we actually had already gotten her as a single carded figure, but this version that came in the 3-pack is an improvement in every single way. She has pinless joints with much better articulation, pinless double elbows, and a bicep swivel, brighter colors, and larger flame effects on her costume. Plus, she has the more modern inkjet technology, so her facial expression looks really, really good. Plus, she came with Miss Lion, so you get her pet dog. It's actually Aunt May's pet dog. So great upgrade there. Iceman, yeah, maybe not so much. I mean, I guess I like the fact that he is on kind of a thin frame, but this is an older body, still has the pins, a lot of kind of wonky looking joints. I don't love the cell shading. It just looks so fake. Like these look like stripes more so than they look like actual shading, and this head sculpt is just haunted looking. So, of the three, certainly my least favorite. But then we come to this Spidey, and this is truly one of my favorite Spider-Man figures ever produced. It's the same body as the Amazing Fantasy 15 Spidey. So for me, that's kind of the ideal physique for Spidey. He's muscular, but a little bit smaller, kind of a little bit younger in appearance. But when you get him with your other figures, he doesn't look like he's a teenager. He's definitely an adult, just on a really athletic, appropriate frame for Spider-Man. The head is taken basically from that Amazing Fantasy 15 head. So it's very Steve Ditko as far as the look of the eyes, which I think is great. And the spider on the back, while not a Ditko spider, is pretty classic as far as a comic look goes. The colors are perfect. This red and blue. The blue is not too bright. It's dark enough, but it doesn't look too like cartoony. And he does have a relatively modern spider on his chest. The big problem that I have with this figure is the lack of availability. This thing was only available in this 3-pack, and that's an expensive figure to get. So I would love to see this re-released in like a best of line, like a best of Marvel Legends, where people could get access to such a great Spider-Man figure. I actually, because this does have the Amazing 15 body, it still has the peg holes where you can put his web wings in. I actually have this one with the web wings down in my Ditko display because I think he makes one of the best versions of a later series Ditko figure, kind of from the 20s up through issue 38. And for my money, this is one of the best Spideys ever made. Enjoying this deep dive into Spidey's cartoon and action figure history? Then give the video a like. And hey, I could use your help. I am super close to a huge milestone. So subscribe to Carbon Scoring, because we're bringing you quality content like this every week. Over a decade later, we finally got what many feel is the definitive cartoon for the wall crawler, Spider-Man the Animated Series. Spanning 65 episodes over 5 seasons, this Fox Kids staple turned an entire generation onto not only the webhead, but his expansive rogues gallery and extended family. Some of the more ludicrous restrictions placed on the show, no punching, no glass breaking, you couldn't even say the word death, all led to more character driven stories, and the show was better for it. I could go on, but why don't we let the figures speak for themselves? When you get these animated figures together, you can see just how much love and dedication went into putting together these early waves of figures. They really capture that animated style. They look like what they looked like on the cartoon. They have the right body types, and these bright colors really pop. These things must have looked so good on store shelves, just almost irresistible for kids of the day. But when you get down to some of the details, you realize that there's actually a lot going on with these. There's way more sculpted detail than you would imagine. For instance, if you look at this Green Goblin, he has a lot of detail sculpted into this figure. The chainmail armor, the head, there's really quite a bit going on with that one. And while most of them have fairly standard 8 or 9 point articulation, they did start to experiment with some more advanced articulation. Like you can see that this vulture figure actually does have ball jointed shoulders. So they were laying the groundwork for future waves with this. Also, these things were geared toward kids. So not only did they need to look good, they needed to play well also. And that's where really cool play features like the one on this Dr. Octopus, where if you grab the back of his back here in the back, you can make his octopus tentacles come around. It's simple, but it's really fun. And it certainly captures the look, the feel, and the style of Spider Man the Animated Series. Okay, we've seen all of the other villains, but what about the actual Spideys from the 90s animated series? This is one of the earliest ones we got, and it's a classic, simple Spidey. I think this was the Web Wings one because you could port in a couple of web wings, and that did allow him to have ball shoulders. Now, they're kind of rudimentary ball shoulders. You can see how those definitely are not as natural looking, and they have like metal rivets in them. But it's a very good classic Spidey. Great colors. The proportions are very consistent with that of the animated series, which is maybe one of the things that I don't love as much, kind of the broader chest, the smaller head, and the smaller eyes. You know, these figures came out during the era when Todd McFarlane's art had really revolutionized the look of Spider-Man, and why the animators decided to go with really kind of a much older look is beyond me, but they were consistent with it. And each of the Spider-Man figures that we got all had kind of some sort of gimmick with them, like this one, which was meant to represent when Peter's spider sense went off. So he's got like a play mechanism where his arms swing back and forth, and he has some really weird looking ball hips. You know, people complain about the hips on current figures. Look at those things. But the important part here is the paint app. This is what Spidey looked like when his spider sense was going off. Instead of having the tingle over his head, he kind of inverted the colors of his entire costume. And they actually made a figure of that. Spidey did appear in web armor during the show, and here he is in his web armor. Very limited articulation on this one, mostly because the play feature has a spring-loaded blaster, but very accurate to the comics, to the issue of, I think it was Web of Spider-Man 100 where this appeared, but also right there on the show. Pretty cool. And the Black Suit Saga was one of the greatest storylines, one of the greatest. It was a 3-part episode on the animated series, and it was fantastic. And this is the first black suit figure that we got in the line. Now, I've complained about the size of the chest. This is like a Rob Liefeld Captain America chest, and it's because there's a hinge mechanism in here. You could pull this part of the costume up, and he would crawl up on a web line on an internal ratchet that was in the inside. It's actually broken, so I have it kind of closed down shut, but it gives you an idea of the first of the black suit Spideys. Again, play features kind of dominated this line. Here is another basic Spidey in a very pre-posed setup. He's not going to move these arms because they're part of the web swinging action that he has. But this was not what this line was about. They actually gave us one of the best Spidey figures ever made with the animated superposable Spider-Man. This guy predated Marvel Legends by years. But look at what you get out of this. You get huge bend, ankles, wrist, ball shoulders, ball hips, a ball diaphragm cut that really gives you great motion, and the head is articulated at two separate places. This is, for me, the definitive Spider-Man, the animated series figure from the initial line. It just is so perfect. It completely captures the look of the character on the screen, and it brought technology that just was not seen in 5-inch kids' toys before. This thing really is a monumental action figure in Spidey's history. Now, I have really loved what Hasbro managed to do with their VHS series. These captured the look of the animated style better than anything before or since. And they went with some unique choices like bringing Smythe into the line, giving us an animated Morbius with his like blood sucking hands, and figures like this vulture in the back and that new Dr. Octopus with that animated style are some of the best looking figures that we've ever gotten. But for me, the real heroes of this line are the civilian figures. Just look at how good that animated Peter Parker is. I mean, he has leapt straight off of the screen. The same can be said for Mary Jane. And while I was so excited to get an Aunt May, and I don't know that this one really is as fully formed as I would love it, it still exists. And the fact that we have an Aunt May figure is just that much cooler. I hope that this line continues because I think there's so much potential for this expanding and really getting that core group of characters from the animated series. We did get both a red and blue and a black Spidey in the VHS line. And the red and blue classic costume one we had seen before. It had already appeared in a cell shaded version on the retro card backs. And I feel like this one that came with the Vulture is kind of a step down in every way. I don't really love this base body for Spider Man, particularly the shoulders, the way there's that huge gap at the shoulders. Yeah, I know it's got a little bit of butterfly, but I just, for some reason, that is really distracting to me. Now, the head sculpt, I think, is very accurate to the show. It has the right look to the eyes. But as far as just a basic Spider Man goes, this one is kind of a letdown. Now, the same cannot be said of the black suit version. This is one of the few times where I think the cell shading really works. And part of that is because they didn't go crazy with it. Unlike Iceman that just has solid stripes all the way going down, this cell shading is more designed to kind of bring out the musculature of Spider-Man. And that was often how it was drawn in the books. It was not uncommon to see like the furrowed brow that is represented here with that little bit of blue up between the eyes, or the way that his clavicles are highlighted, or the marks of his deltoid. This is a great figure. Incredible articulation all the way around. I particularly love this rolling diaphragm cut. That is so good. And this guy, he really gets into some super awesome poses. So as disappointing as the red and blue Spidey is exactly how excellent the black is. This is one that I really probably need to get down in my Spider-Verse display because this guy doesn't need to be in a box. He needs to be out and enjoyed. How do you follow up the most successful Spidey cartoon to date? One which was grounded in what makes Peter so popular, his everyman problems, his underdog pluck. Why, you shoot him off into space and have him fight against bestials from a 1970s Jack Kirby fever dream. Surprisingly, this didn't work, and after 13 episodes, Spider-Man Unlimited was mercifully put out of its misery. Massive thanks to my friend Sam who found this figure for me just in time for me to film this video. Give him a follow on Instagram at HeyKidsComicsSC. Sam puts on one of the best Comic-Cons in the Southeast twice a year, and you can always find me there. So hook him up, give him a like, and check him out. And thanks again for the help on finding this figure just in the nick of time. I gotta say, I am really loving this figure. They did a sneak peek of it at San Diego Comic Con where they showed these wrist gauntlets, and obviously everybody immediately knew that it was going to be Spider Man Unlimited. They picked up on that very quickly. But the whole thing comes together really well. The inversion of Spidey's basic color scheme with him being more blue than red, kind of flipping those colors, but still having kind of that underarm sort of diagonal cut that you see on the classic Spidey suit, but here it's accomplished with the red. Kind of a nice choice. And I love this huge spider logo on the chest, and the fact that it actually goes to a sculpted in ribbed pattern that extends down the arms all the way to the spider gauntlets is pretty sweet. Now, he has the web cape on the back, which is obviously reminiscent of Spidey 2099. And as I was doing research for this, it sounds like they were actually considering doing a Spider-Man 2099 cartoon as a follow-up to Spidey the Animated Series instead of what actually came out with this and Spider-Man Unlimited. And I don't know if it was stopped because Batman went with Batman Beyond or that they thought it was just like too close to that, but perhaps some of those concept designs actually came from Spidey 2099's look. In any case, this is the kind of stuff that I love from Marvel Legends. When they go out on a limb, when they bring us unique new Spidey figures. And with Spider-Verse, this guy is going to look so great flying around in my Spider-Verse display. I can't wait to get him down to the secret lounge and get him set up. But as much as I kind of didn't like the cartoon, I do kind of love this Spidey figure. Us hardcore Spidey fans knew Sam Raimi's first Spider Man film was going to be a hit, but I don't think even the most diehard among us realized it would be the global sensation it became, one that spawned a semi sequel animated series on MTV? The show had a fantastic voice cast, with Doogie Howser as Peter, Steve from 90210 as Harry, and personal 90s crush Lisa Loeb as MJ. But the computer generated animation was, well, very 2003. The show was able to play with more mature themes than any previous Spidey cartoon, but its oddball placement on MTV prevented it from becoming the hit it deserved to be. Now, this is truly one of the coolest figures in my collection, the MTV Spider Man. Produced by Toy Biz and released at retail back in 2003, this thing is a departure in every way from all of the other Spideys that were on the shelves at that time. Remember, that was kind of as Marvel Legends was really ramping up and we're focusing on super articulated figures, whereas this one is much more about the sculpt, much more about capturing that CGI look of the cartoon series. He doesn't even have bends at his elbow, just a little bit of swivel and something that sort of passes as a ball joint at the shoulder. But it was much more about getting the accuracy of the design. You've got that classic Sam Raimi movie design on the back, but I love what they did with the paintwork here. These are raised web lines, and they have like a combination of black with silver highlights. And you can see as I kind of rotate the figure how that works and how it plays in the light. And that was exactly how the character looked on the screen. It's just such a cool, unique, different look for the web slinger, and one that was perfectly executed by Toy Biz with this figure. Now, they also made a lizard figure for some reason. I didn't pick that up back in the day, and it goes for hundreds of dollars now. So it's pretty unlikely I'm ever going to add that one to my collection. But this one is an absolute classic and one that I'm so proud to have. And he actually sits down in my Spider-Verse display because I think of him as like a completely alternate universe of Spidey. Really great stuff. It all came together in 2008 with the Spectacular Spider-Man. This show was perfection in every way, drawing on over 50 years of comics history, perfectly combining storylines and character arcs to give us the definitive animated Spider-Man show. And it was loaded with Easter eggs. Yeah, you saw that. Take another look. Originally intended to be 65 episodes over 5 seasons, we ended up with less than half when Disney took over the Marvel license and prematurely canceled the show. If I were all powerful for one day, I'd call up producer Greg Weisman, back the money truck up to his house and beg him to complete this love letter to everything Spidey. These spectacular Spider Man figures feel like a perfect microcosm of the series itself. They are gorgeous, absolutely perfect, unique, stylized. They each have their own special design that completely reflects the look of the animation, and yet somehow this feels incomplete. The fact that this series was cut off right as it was getting to its apex is just absolutely criminal, and the same can be said for this toy line. There were so many more possibilities that we could have seen. And yes, we did get a pretty decent rogues gallery out of those first two seasons of figures, even to the point where we got second versions of Doc Ock and Venom that improved upon the first ones. But there just was so much left on the table. I mean, to see how incredible each one of these individual figures looks, and to know that there was so many more. We really needed figures of our civilian figures to get a Gwen Stacy, a Harry Osborn, an actual Peter Parker in this style would have been so good. Tombstone, the different villains, more of the enforcers. There just was so much left. But I must say, the dedication and the love that went into producing these is absolutely clear. You can see just how much sculpted detail and accuracy each one of these figures contains, and it is a great testament to the best Spider-Man cartoon ever made. One of the things that I love the most about the Spectacular Spider-Man line is they never quit until they got it right. This was the first version of Spider-Man that came in the line, and it's pretty close. I mean, it has kind of bigger hands, a bigger head that's close to being the right shape, but not exactly. And of course, this web pattern is just way too tight. Now, they did release this same body with a Peter Parker head, and gotta admit, that's pretty good. That head definitely looks like Peter Parker from the cartoon. But again, the web pattern's not right, and it's just not exactly where it needs to be. So they kept going and released this figure. Now we're talking. Now we're looking at the Spectacular Spider-Man. Look at how lean and young and athletic this guy looks. You can see the different shape of the head has that bigger, kind of tapering down, much more accurate to the look of the cartoon. The web pattern is spaced out properly. Really good. This is enough. This would have been enough, but they weren't content to stop there. They actually took that figure and made it in a super articulated version. Now you've got bend at the wrist, you've got toe joints, you've got a different movement through the diaphragm in the middle, but you maintain that perfect head sculpt and these great proportions of the cartoon, the animated look. They did the same thing with the black suit. Their first attempt at the black suit, again, not bad. Actually, really good body proportions, but this head and these eyes, they're just not right. So thankfully, they came out with another version. The way that Peter looked when he first took on the symbiote costume, which, as you'll notice, still has the web pattern on it of his original look, which was very cool because part of the storyline was as the symbiote took over more and more, he lost that web line and the suit became all black. And so you get the final version of this costume, an absolute perfect representation of Peter in the black suit. But this is my favorite Spider-Man cartoon. So I also was not satisfied with what we got. And so I picked up this custom head sculpt. And I've got it on one of the CT toys, the Mafex Spidey copy bodies, and it works so well. This thing has been sitting on my desk, and I have been fiddling with it for a month. I just love the way that animated head sculpt looks, and it is just absolutely perfect on this frame. I'll have a link in the description to where you can pick up one of these custom heads, as well as tons of other customs, and I've bought a bunch from them. But this is now kind of my best version of the Spectacular Spider-Man. I'm not gonna dog on Ultimate Spider Man and its follow up. It's actually a pretty good show. Funny at times, and it introduced several generations of kids to the wall crawler, as these shows were on the air from 2012 until 2020. It wasn't for me, but it was never meant to be.
I don't ever remember purposefully buying a toy from this cartoon series, but as I was going through my animated box, I realized I actually have quite a few of these. They are meant for kids. They are simpler articulation schemes. They're basically kind of 5 POA and they're a little smaller than Marvel Legends, but you got to admit they still really tried to make them look pretty great. Iron Spider is one of my absolute least favorite designs, which makes me that much more surprised that I actually have this one in my box. But I got to admit, this basic Spidey is a pretty decent figure. He's got more articulation than those other ones we looked at. He's got, a little bit of a ball shoulder. It doesn't move a lot, but he does have bend at the elbow and the knees, those crazy kind of circle knees that Hasbro sometimes uses. You don't have, well, yeah, you do. You got a little bit of the ankle there, but this is a classic Spidey. It definitely has kind of the thinner eyelets around the mask that goes with that unlimited Spidey look. Big classic logo on the back. There's nothing wrong with this. And for the kids who grew up on this cartoon, this is going to be their definitive Spider-Man, and I am totally okay with that. It's not mine, but it's not a bad figure.
And if you want the next generation to fall in love with the wall crawler, then introduce them to Spidey and his amazing friends. This Disney Junior show lays the groundwork for a lifetime of web spinning fun.
Now, I have not watched a single episode of this show because it's not aimed for me and my kids are too old to watch it. But I was in Target and I saw these and I just had to pick them up because they are so darn cute. Look at that huge head and those giant eyes. And hey, this is pretty dadgum accurate to Miles's costume. I mean, it really does look like him. It's got great sculpting. It's got good articulation. You can put him, he can fit nicely in the vehicles that come with this line. And he's got a little bit of movement here at the wrist so that he can drive the cars and the different things that this comes with. And this head on a ball joint actually is really cool. I think these things are really cute. I absolutely had to get this Iron Man. I mean, this just blows the cuteness factor all the way through the roof. I love how he's almost got like a little smirk at his mask, and there he's got his repulsor blast. Oh, so good. Gwen looking awesome. She's got her hood up, and there's some sculpted in webbing. It's not really painted, but it is sculpted in there. But she looks so terrifically great with her hood. And oh, I just could not resist this black cat figure. Look at those eyes and that little pouty face, and the fact that she's got, like a giant hood with her cat ears up. Uh, you know, it's important that new people come into this hobby all the time. This is something that has to continue to grow. And cartoons like this set the foundation for a love of Spider Man that will continue for the rest of their lives. For me, I remember those reruns of Spider Man 67. I remember seeing Spider Man on the Electric Company. Those I remember those 1970s Spider-Man TV movies. So for me, that was my most early foundation. And for some kids, this is going to be theirs. And these were like $5. I mean, they're like super cheap. So you can get these into kids' hands so that they develop a love of the wall crawler and they'll learn the lore and they'll continue to grow and keep building this hobby as we go on. And I think these are a great place to start.
Now let's get back to your friendly neighborhood Spider Man. It's remarkable how it can look like a comic page at one moment with those heavy inking lines and flat colors, but still be so fluid in the animation. The focus on character development over the first two episodes was a treat, and you can see multiple story threads beginning to unspool. I am really looking forward to where this one goes. And just this week, we had the reveal of the first action figure based on this tune, the homemade suit from Hot Toys Hano Studios. This is supposed to be their entry-level brand, but it still costs over 200 bucks. I'll admit, it looks like there's a ton of detail in this one. So what do you think? Have you watched the new cartoon? And if so, what are your thoughts? What would you like to see in action figures from this? And what are your first memories of Spidey cartoons? Let me know in the comments. And as always, for the best in comics history and action figures, subscribe to Carbon Scoring.